All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen, Joe. Just let me know if you can see this.
Looks
Awesome.
good.
Thank you. Great. And I realized, hold on, I want to quickly turn on the captions in case anyone needs them. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, those should be on now, which is great. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Sarah Musiker. I'm a consultant for Flume, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Just to kick us off, and as a reminder, quick technical overview, there's Q&A at the bottom of the screen. The webcast is being recorded, and we will share a link to that and the slides that you'll see here after the webcast has concluded. And live captions are enabled for those that need it. And we're excited to have you join us for the Flume Household Water Use Index. This is going to cover water use in Q1 of 2024, as well as a few special topics, specifically updated energy conservation standards for residential clothes washers. We always do an indoor and outdoor residential water use pattern review. And then we also will be looking at water use in the Colorado River Basin. And Flume has been doing these quarterly household water use index presentations for well over, I think it's 3 years now. Yeah, okay, it's a long time. But if this is your first time joining us, the index is really an ongoing effort to collect, analyze, and report on real-time water use data and trends across the United States on a quarterly basis. And more than that, really our goal is to make this information accessible to everyone. Right now, data does feel very siloed in the water space, and so our webcast hopes to change that by sharing key insights into water use over the past few years. And we just look to share this with anyone who's really interested in working in this space, because once we have all this information, we're all much smarter about the vital work that we're doing, whether it's planning and forecasting, assessing compliance with federal or state regulations, developing dynamic programming, and more. So we'll be touching on all of these things today, and let's go ahead and dive right in. So first I want to share who we're joined by today. First and foremost, I really want to introduce our special guest, Andrew Morris from the Alliance for Water Efficiency. Andrew joined AWE in 2023 and brings a wealth of experience in water policy and advocacy to his work. Previously, he held positions focusing on water planning and policy with Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. That is a mouthful of a name, and the Atlanta Regional Commission, emphasizing regional resiliency, drought response, and interstate water disputes. He has worked with national trade associations and has expertise in state and federal policy, plumbing code development, utility water loss auditing, efficiency programming, and much more. We're so excited to have him join us. Joe Fazio is the general manager of Flume. He helps to roll out our utility programs and works closely with the data we receive from devices around the country. Joe has a long background of working with successful tech companies and startups, and we're really lucky to have him here. And Peter Mayer is the principal of Water DM and a strategic partner of Flume. Over his career, Peter has worked with hundreds of water utilities, maybe thousands now, who knows, in the US and Canada, and he's an end-use research expert. So this is what we'll be discussing today. I'll be giving a quick intro about Flume itself. We'll talk about how we collect and analyze this data. Then we'll have a couple of quick special announcements, which we're really excited about. Andrew's going to present on clothes washers, and we'll dive into the index as well. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. Zoom, be sure to ask them now, and we'll go through them at the end of the webcast. Sorry, we already had a question come in, and I just looked at it. I shouldn't have done that because it threw me off. All right, so who is Flume? Just to set the framework, Flume is a big believer that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so since the founding of Flume, they really worked to liberate water data to provide real-time insights into what's actually happening in communities around the country and in homes around the nation. And while Flume Water, the organization, works with consumers and utilities to provide customers with this real-time information, Flume Data Labs work specifically on the analysis. And so FDL is focused specifically on analyzing water use data from these sensors across the country to produce this real-time understanding of where water is going and better inform decision makers that are helping to shape our future. And so kind of how does this work? It starts with this meter attachment, which you'll see right here. And this device reads water use off the existing meter every 5 seconds. It's essentially a Fitbit for your existing water meter. From there, data is sent through the cloud, where our machine learning algorithms begin to identify water use patterns by appliance and fixture. And for household specific insights, this information kind of goes to an app on customers' phones, showing them use in their home, leak detection, and more. And for water agencies, this information is aggregated, and we provide analytics and insights for across communities, as well as household specific information, depending on the nature of our partnership with that utility. And so, as I mentioned, Flume that reads this water every 5 seconds, which enables Flume Data Labs to read the unique fingerprint of each appliance and fixture and separates out water use by its endpoint. And to talk about why this is pretty revolutionary, Joe or Peter, I'm not sure who's going to chat about the next couple of slides, but just kind of, okay, Peter, we'll have you join us to talk about kind of why this matters so much, this 5-second resolution.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Resolution, or how frequently you actually interrogate the water meter and understand the flow rate and the volume, helps to determine what level you can disaggregate water use. So here's data happening in the middle of the night at a 1-hour resolution. And you see there's blocks of water use that are happening every hour. If you're maybe trying to separate indoor and outdoor water use, this is definitely going to be useful. But for understanding what's going on beyond that, you can't tell. Let's go to the next one. So then now we're looking at 1 minute. So now that's the same data, but now we've drilled down to the 1 minute level. So now we can see, okay, it's lower flow, there's discrete water use events. It's definitely indoor use because it's not high enough or continuous enough really to be outdoor use. There could be some low flow leaks going on, but you know, 1 minute, so 1 minute is giving us much better information. And then now we go down to the level that Flume looks at with the 5-second data, which is the next slide. And here we can see very clearly the 6 cycles of a dishwasher, each one, you know, very, you know, machine driven and precise in that duration and flow rate. And then a toilet flush that occurred, you know, right before the final cycle, and then some intermittent just low flow leaks. And this is important to understand because we're going to be showing you data from clothes washers today. And the way that we understand the disaggregated water use for clothes washers is very much the same. It's a mechanical pattern that's repeated, and so that's how we're able to determine the volume of use for each clothes washer load.
Awesome.
So there's been 30 years of this end-use data collection, and I really started doing this with my master's thesis back in mid-90s. Back then, you know, a big sample was 30, and then when we got into the residential end uses of water studies, we had samples that were 100 per utility, and the total study had about 1,200. Actually, a little less than that, about 1,150 households. In 2016, the second residential end use study, we had a sample of about 760 houses where we had end use data. And in both those studies, we only had 2 weeks of data to look at. And that data took a long time to analyze and compile. So now with Flume, today we'll be looking at data from probably about 100,000 or more data collectors that are all collecting data continuously for 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds, the data is being analyzed and compiled all pretty much real time, every day, every day of the year, and then the data is disaggregated by computers instead, so really a completely different approach. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Steve. And you know, all of this is really aimed to help water utilities, providers, policymakers, businesses more, just have a better understanding of where water is going, to help them plan for the future, comply with a number of regulations, and assess program success. And we can kind of help to answer questions such as how much water do households use indoors and out? You know, how much does my household use compared to other community households in my community or even other states? Are my conservation programs working? How much water will a new tract home use? Things like that. And all of this has come to an incredibly exciting conclusion lately for us. So Flume has been informed that we were selected by the Water Research Foundation for the Residential End Uses of Water Study version 3. We're still in the contract negotiation, so we're working to finalize that, and we can't officially announce until then. But we are in the process of finalizing that and confirming all of the utility partners we're working with on this in the meantime. And for those that are unaware, this is a 2-year study that basically is done every decade since the 90s and provides information on indoor and outdoor water use in single, and now they're expanding it also to multifamily homes across North America. So this is the US and Canada. And this document is used extensively by, again, policymakers, water utilities, wholesalers, planning groups, businesses, and more to help really understand exactly how water is being used by households in North America. So it's a vital piece of research, and we're so excited to be contributing to this work. We currently have 39 utilities that have volunteered to participate in the study so far. There's a few spots remaining, so if you are interested, please contact us as soon as possible to see if we can fit you in. That would be wonderful. And also, this is kind of new as well. We're also in the final contract negotiations to work with the California Department of Water Resources to help support a research study they're doing on indoor residential water use across the state. This will be done for the next 4 years. And really, this research is focused on suppliers' ability to comply with future state water efficiency requirements for indoor GPCD. So all utilities in California are invited to participate in the study. Flumes will be provided, so please let us know if you're interested as soon as possible. And again, Ralph is the person to contact there. You can see his email at the bottom of the screen. And in the follow-up email, I'll also include all of this information as well. So with that, there's a lot going on. We're going to switch back to the index. But like I said, we'll be diving into kind of specific water use by appliance and fixture today, like we often do. And we'll also be talking about indoor clothes washers, water efficiency standards, and why all of this matters. So with that, Joe, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. Well, great. Let's dive right into it. For those of you who've joined us before, this is a familiar format to you. We're going to be going through pretty much the same charts we normally do, but just adding the last quarter of data. So in this index, we'll have data through basically the end of March of this year of 2024. And as always, we like to kind of make a little heat map of where all the flumes are. The red dots indicate high densities of flumes, and then the smaller the dot, the lower the densities. But the cool thing is we now have flumes all over the nation in all 50 states. We actually have quite a few, and I probably should add Canada now to this as well. We're starting to get flumes in Canada as well, even some flumes in Alaska.
Yeah, and Hawaii too.
Yeah, actually quite a few flumes in Hawaii. And for the purposes of this webinar, though, we're going to be focusing on the largest metropolitan service areas of the nation. And just to give you an idea, here's the flume distribution in those 15 metropolitan areas. And I always like to make this clear. When I say Los Angeles, for instance, we're not just referring to the city of Los Angeles. We're referring to the Los Angeles metropolitan area, which is quite large. Well, it's kind of hard to tell here, but this is Los Angeles and Riverside, but it covers quite a big area in there. And San Francisco is not just San Francisco, it's the San Francisco Bay Area as an example, and again, covers quite a large area. So with that background, let's jump into indoor use. So what we're looking at here, and I'll set this up and I'll let Peter do a little analysis here, is this is the indoor use of the top 15 or the largest 15 metro areas over the last 5 quarters. We like to do 5 just so you can kind of do a year over year comparison of Q1. And essentially what we've done is we've plotted each metropolitan service area for each month essentially, so that you can kind of see the range. So for instance, in January of this year, you can see here that San Francisco had the lowest indoor GPCD and Phoenix had the highest indoor, right? Oh, excuse me, that says Chicago.
They must be the same. They must be overlaying each other.
So Chicago and Phoenix had the highest indoor GPCD. So it's a pretty big span, Peter. I mean, you can see here it kind of ranges from low 30s to high 40s.
Yeah, it is a big span, but it's also, I mean, for these homes equipped with flumes, the average in every single place is below 50 GPCD. So you know, they've achieved already some degree of efficiency, and certainly, you know, across some of these statistical areas, you know, we're seeing large numbers of customers, you know, who are able to use less than 5 gallons per day indoors, and consistently. And certainly that's what we're seeing in San Francisco and Boston, some of these other places. Um, in terms of like what happened in Q1 of 2024, the thing that looks a little different to me versus Q1 of 23 is it's a wider spread in the data. There was the things were a little more tightly packed back then, so there were maybe some more climactic differences, other things going on. Still quite consistent overall. In just the level of water use, though.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, we can go in and look a little more specifically at Q1 here. So this data is from Q1 specifically. So what you're seeing here is the average indoor GPCD. So we're looking at gallons per household per person per day. So
Correct.
in Phoenix, the average person's using about 46.8 gallons of water per day. And
Indoors.
excuse me, indoors, and we'll talk about outdoors in a second. And Peter, do you think maybe this is perhaps a snowbird effect? You've got, you know, perhaps more people in a residence in Phoenix, perhaps in the winter. What do you think is?
Well, I mean, Phoenix has been, you know, is near the top for indoor GPCD, regardless of the quarter. So, I mean, there seems to be higher indoor water use, but not, you know, it's still, again, don't want to portray it as outside of an efficient range at this point, because below 50 is still showing considerable progress for where we've been in the past. But as we're going to talk about later, as we get into clothes washers, there's still remarkable efficiency potential that remains indoors, even at some of these highly efficient levels.
Yeah, and Peter, we always get asked this question. Right now, we're looking at data from Flume users in particular. And I think what we've been finding is that Flume users tend to be more efficient indoors than non-Flume users. And the
Yes.
reason being is that we're telling them about leaks and they're fixing leaks.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at this. You know, we've measured an average annual impact of between 4 and 8,000 gallons or so, and it looks like the impact occurs very quickly after you install the flume. Within the first few weeks, you see indoor use generally going down. So this is something that, as we're doing these end use studies, we're going to be collecting large billing data sets, and so we'll understand the water use of everyone who has a flume and those who don't have a flume, and also pre and post installation of flume. So we'll use that to help sort of true up the flume data to make sure when we're presenting, let's say, the indoor water use as part of the residential and use of water study, it really conforms to the billing data, which is the actual measurement of what's going on in the service area, and it's going to be more of the behavioral data and the fixture efficiency data, which we're going to be getting to some degree from the flumes.
Great, thanks for that, Peter. This is one more fun chart for indoor. And after this presentation, we'll provide a link to this dashboard to everybody, and you can play around with this yourself. But this chart is kind of cool because it's very interactive. And what you can do is actually select certain cities. So if we don't want Detroit on here, we can turn it off by clicking on it. If we want to turn it back on, we can click it. And we can click any of these other metro areas over here. And then you can actually compare the last 5 quarters of average indoor use per person for these different cities. So for instance, in blue, we're looking at Phoenix over the last 5 quarters. You can see a little uptick in the last quarter here for Phoenix, which kind of goes to my snowbird theory. Maybe it's wrong, but maybe some higher use in the winter in Phoenix.
Well,
Um,
it did go up, and also it was on an inclining trend in early 2023, but it was just not as high as it is this year.
yeah.
But if we're talking, you're probably within the margin of error, though. That's a small change, a couple of gallons.
Yeah, and definitely. When you're looking at this scale too, I think you see the changes more. When you actually look at this indoor use plotted on the same graph as outdoor use looks fairly flat. Yeah, there's some seasonal differences, but it's basically fairly consistent throughout the year. However, in San Francisco here, this is kind of an interesting hump in the summer here. Again, fairly flat, not a whole lot of change, but on this scale, it certainly looks like a big mountain in the middle.
Right.
All right, let's go ahead and get to outdoor use. So obviously a lot more variability in outdoor use. I'll set this up, Peter, and I'll let you do some of the analysis. Just like indoor use, we're looking at the last 5 quarters here. Most current quarter here is through January through March of this year. On the y-axis, we're looking at gallons per household per day. Now, indoor use, we were looking at gallons per person per day. For outdoor, we like to look at gallons per household per day. We think that's a little more meaningful. As you would expect, the outdoor use gets highest in the summer, lowest in the winter months. But I guess we're seeing this pretty consistently through the last 3 years. We're typically seeing Dallas kind of being the outlier in the summer, at least from these 15 metro areas.
Real spike in outdoor water use that we've seen in Dallas. In August and July in particular, and we looked at that in our past webinars. We compared the spike in Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, actually. So if you want to go back and revisit that, you can. In the winter quarters, though, things tighten up, and there's very, very limited outdoor use in many of these places, if any.
Definitely. In fact, we can take a look at Q1 in particular here. You can see here that, outdoor use goes to near zero in, places where it's cold and snowy, et cetera. But we tend to see, in fact, I think you can see it best on this map. The orangier areas are the places where the outdoor water is higher. You can see it's called kind of limited down here to the south. And the bluer areas are obviously the colder places here in the winter.
Right, and the quarter goes through end of March, and so there's some additional use included from that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you start to see outdoor.
Start to see some, yeah.
And then I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just like with indoor, you're able, when you access this dashboard yourself, to actually go and compare the outdoor curves as well for these different metro areas. I think this is kind of fun to look at, though. Here is that Dallas spike. We're basically plotting every month of outdoor use for basically the last 15 months. And you can see here, there's this kind of large outdoor peak here for Dallas. I mean, it was really hot in Texas last year.
It's definitely, and but this also reflects the local landscape choices and irrigation patterns.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of second highest here is Riverside. Riverside's a fairly hot part of California. And you can see here too, they're spiking up as well, and a month sooner, but definitely spiking in the summer as well. And then you take a place like Boston, where it's basically zero until spring, get a little pop up here, but it stays fairly low all year long.
Oh yeah, you don't need much supplemental irrigation. That might be people running their hose or on something. It's I like that you have Los Angeles there. It's interesting so Los Angeles and Riverside, not that far. I mean, 40 miles apart or something, but the climate's quite different, and also the demographics of you have smaller lots probably in Los Angeles than in Riverside, and so there you can see the differences in outdoor use, but also very similar shape.
Yeah, and it's important too to note that again, this is the Los Angeles metro area. A lot of coastal areas are included in this. Orange County is included in it, so you get a lot of kind of coastal effect there too.
Yep.
So I think on average, it's a lot cooler here than it is where you're looking in Riverside County. All right, one more tab I want to go through here before we get into clothes washers, and we can go through this fairly quickly. And again, this is something you can explore on your own using the same dashboard that I'm using here. Just to set this up, we've been tracking water use in basically the Colorado River Basin. So this is the Colorado River Basin. These are basically the states that are getting their water, or at least a portion of their water, from the Colorado River. So we've been basically tracking outdoor use for these states versus the rest of the states. And it's kind of an interesting, we started doing this back in 2021, where the drought pressure was probably the most we've seen. Since then, the drought pressure has eased because we've finally got some rain, but it's kind of interesting to take a look at the outdoor use here in blue represents the Colorado River basin states.
It's actually the total use. This is the total per household use. So it includes indoor and outdoor.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry, Peter. You're absolutely right. This
And
is total use. Sorry, the next slide.
that's all right. I mean, but it's driven by outdoor use.
Yeah,
That's
I
I
think
mean, as we've seen, the indoor use is fairly consistent, you know, with some variability, but the outdoor use is what drives the show here. The the difference, though, I mean, in starting in 21, the Colorado River Basin states were using substantially more water. And overall, I mean, their trajectory has actually been to come down. The other states, the water use has been more consistent overall. Now they're basically identical for the past quarter. The magnitude of water use, but it is interesting to see the trajectory, the downward trajectory of the water use in these homes in the Colorado River Basin in particular.
Yeah, and I think what's driven a lot of this is there was a lot of rain late Q4, early Q1 here, and then the same last year as well in that same time period. So we're seeing kind of these curves come together because of the rain. We've also looked at each of these states, at least states where we have enough flumes to be kind of statistically relevant. So we've looked at Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, and Utah. And here we actually are looking at outdoor water use. So
Yes.
sorry about that faux pas there. But in Arizona, what we've done is taken a look at outdoor use on the y-axis. And then the blue line represents 2021, orange line is 2022, green line is 2023, and we only have limited data for 2024 so far, but that's the red line here. And what's kind of interesting about this, Peter, is that we've seen this kind of gradual decline here in outdoor water use as well, since kind of the crisis period here in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, this could be, you know, a result of differing climates over these years, but we know it's still darn hot in that time period in Arizona, and outdoor use has declined among this set of customers, and that's what the overall data showed, that we're seeing the water use just across the region actually coming down in a similar fashion, and this so the other states are a similar story, I think.
Yeah, let's take a look at California. One thing to note too is we tried to keep this, well, we didn't try, we did. We kept this y-axis the same so that the scale is the same on each of these. So if we go to California now, kind of similar use patterns here and similar magnitude as well. And I think you also see this similar trend that 2021 was the highest, and then it's come down each year since 2021 in outdoor usage as well.
Right.
And then Colorado, we can just click through these really quickly before we get into clothes washers. Kind of interesting. I think this one was driven probably more by climate than anything, kind of this weird dip in the pattern here in Colorado in 2020.
Oh yeah, that was absolutely a very wet, cool spring, and we were having similar spring this year actually, so we could see 24 with a similar pattern.
Peter lives in Colorado, so he knows. And then also you can take a look at the patterns for both Nevada and Utah as well. Interesting that the outdoor use was highest out of all of these in Nevada, in Utah. Not sure what's driving that, but kind of an interesting curve in Utah. All right. Now for our special topic. We try to do a special topic in each of these webinars. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Peter and Andrew now and welcome Andrew to the conversation. And Peter and Andrew are first going to go through a couple of slides that talk about how clothes washer efficiency has changed over the past 25 years. And then we're going to turn it over to Andrew to talk about really why is that happening as it relates to policy and some other stuff that's been going on, as well as what it's going to look like maybe over the next 25 years. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Peter and Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, hey, Andrew.
How you doing, Peter?
I'm doing all right. You ready to dive into clothes washers?
It's what everyone's been waiting for, I'm sure.
Yeah,
so
but that's why I had that photo. Like, it's like we're going to dive into the clothes washers. All right. So here we have the summary clothes washer data from the first 2 residential end uses of water studies, and we also have the sample size. And then we had for the Flume data, we pulled data from 2023 from Flumes in California, and so that was 17, almost 18,000 homes. So this is just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the sample sizes that we're dealing with and how different it is. So the first data was collected kind of between 1996 and 1998. Average clothes washer load volume was 41 gallons per load. And if you think about what a clothes washer was like back then, it was very much that top loader with the central agitator type of clothes washer. Then the second study, it went down to 31. And now the most recent data from California has us down at 25 gallons per load. So substantial reductions. What do you think about that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think we don't often focus on clothes washers because they're, we don't think of them. They're not labeled by WaterSense. They're not in a plumbing code. So it's something our industry hasn't focused as much attention, I would say, on. But obviously, you can see here the really large impact of those standards over time. And I would be curious, the California data, is that you think representative, or talk about the 25 gallons that we're seeing today?
It's across so many different homes. I mean, it's a lot of different clothes washers. So
Right.
yeah, I'd be very surprised if the average, is all that different.
Yeah, and I think that we see with like plumbing fixtures, you get differences state to state. But for federal standards for residential clothes washers, it's a uniform standard.
It's a uniform standard, right? Yeah. Let's look at the frequency next. So this is how frequently people are running their clothes washer. So we calculate that as the number of loads per household per day. And so here in the first end use study, we had it at 0.81. So people are just, running not every day, but almost every day. And we found almost that same number, 0.78, in the second end use study. And then lo and behold, it's gone down a little bit. So rather than like people running their clothes washer more frequently, we're actually seeing people run their clothes washer a little less frequently.
I think you're seeing some increase. This came out in some of the DOE rulemaking. Some increase in capacity size measured in cubic feet. So the drums, if you will, the average drum size is going up a little bit. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of that is due to changes in the machine types in people's homes.
Okay, it's easier to overstuff your front loader, maybe. Yeah. So here's what it does for per capita use. So per capita use has gone from 15 gallons per person per day all the way down to just under 6 gallons per person per day for clothes washing. So really a third of what it used to be. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to get to talk about how this has occurred, but I'm really excited to hear about where we might be going in the future, because believe it or not, there's still efficiency savings to be had.
That's right.
So with that, let's switch over to Andrew's presentation.
Thanks, Peter.
I will do that. Give me just a second.
I think, in the first couple slides, I think most of you all know the Alliance for Water Efficiency. We're a 501c3. We have members from across the country, a lot of water utilities, a lot of technology companies, and others. Part of what we do, next slide, please, is knowledge building and policy change. And that's really what I'm talking to you about today is what's been going on in the policy space and how does that change what we know about indoor water use and where it could go, I think is especially interesting. I encourage you to check out our website if you're not familiar with us. Follow us on LinkedIn. We're pretty active on there. And we also have an annual symposium coming up in the summer. So you can check all that out at the website. Next slide, please. So again, I mentioned this before, but why are we talking about the Department of Energy and why are we talking about clothes washers? Because they have hot water use and electricity use, it is DOE that sets the federal standards for water efficiency. And these are mandatory standards. So all clothes washers sold after the effective date must meet DOE's standards. And they do include water efficiency. So most people think water sense or maybe EPA, but when you're thinking residential clothes washers, you want to be talking about DOE, at least for the minimum standards. And I just put two pictures. I'll mention this throughout. You're probably familiar with them. There's top loaders and front loaders. And I'll be talking mostly about the standard sizes of those. So just wanted to put that up front. There's two main types. Next slide, please. So the history of what the DOE, and in some cases Congress will include in one of their, when they address energy, they'll put some actual standards in the law itself. So it's kind of back and forth between Congress and DOE, but it's been pretty regular that they've been revisited and greater efficiency improvements are made and become required for all machines. And this really spans the spectrum that Peter presented on through the residential end uses. And so you can see it's been a gradual but steady march towards higher efficiency. And I'm going to be talking about the most recent one in blue down the bottom. Next slide, please. So I think we've had a really interesting time working and collaborating with a number of organizations AWE has, particularly the Appliance Standards Awareness Project. They're focused on a wide range of appliances. And I think our unique value add to this coalition was focusing more specifically on water. ASAP did an excellent job. We were very pleased to partner with them, and I'm happy to support them on the water efficiency. And so the new rule that came out does have a compliance date, still a bit off in the future, 2028. And Peter and Flume and data from Flume actually helped with the rulemaking on this because some of the questions that came up during the rulemaking process were hard to answer, or we only had older data. So I think some of the data that they had was really helpful as part of this process. So I want to thank them for that. Interestingly, the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, AHAM, was part of this discussion, and ultimately ASAP and the collaborators and the manufacturers reached an agreement. So this was a consensus kind of approach. The Manufacturers Association was on board with where these standards ended up. So it was a collaborative process as well. Next slide, please. So this is really just a table of what Peter showed you earlier, at least in the first 3 columns with data in it. You can see that water use gallons per load. And then I've added to the right, the far right hand columns are what you would see for the DOE standard for a top loader and a front loader, holding the loads per household per day constant.
This is the new standard, right? The 2028 standard? That's
exactly right. Yep, this is the new standard. So you can see at those levels, and this is the maximum allowed under those new standards, you're still going to see some additional savings as more and more people introduce and buy those clothes washers. Next slide, please. So I thought it was fun just to kind of think about, this is not an expert financial analysis, so others could do a better job because I've held the rate constant over the years. And that $12.60 per 1,000 gallons for water and sewer is what WaterSense typically uses these days for its analysis. And so you look at the gallons per year under the various, the first 2 residential end uses with Flume data, and then on the right hand, the 2 new standards from DOE. And you can see the gallons going down pretty significantly over a year, along with the water and sewer bills. Again, you could do a fancier version of this, but I think it's illustrative of the level and scope of impact that you're seeing in cost savings.
I mean, the potential is almost to cut clothes washing use in half from where it is today, if we went to the most efficient level. So that is remarkable given what we've already achieved.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one thing that's interesting, I'll get into this in a bit more, but the numbers here are only the maximum efficiency allowed under the standard, not the average. Also, Energy Star labels clothes washers, and there are residential clothes washers that already do a good bit better than even the 2028 standard. So if you think about average water use and you think about Energy Star and future possibilities, I think there's actually even more room than this slide would suggest. Next slide. And I'll give just an anecdote because it was fun and I had the data for it. I recently moved from Georgia to Ohio, and when I bought my house, it had a top loader in the basement. You can see it there. It's that white guy. And I had installed my Flume, but my clothes washer was sitting in my garage, the one I had moved up from Georgia. I just hadn't gotten around to installing it. And so August was my first full month of living in my house. I wasn't on vacation. I just was doing laundry, doing normal things. And I used almost 1,500 gallons that month in clothes washer water use. And when I saw that with my Flume, I was like, I should probably get around to changing that. And so I installed my front loader and did that towards the end of the month. And so September, again, I wasn't gone for vacation. It was kind of just normal use. My use dramatically declined. And that's with a somewhat older Energy Star model, front loader. And the rates for water and sewer in my town are very high. So your savings would probably be less, but nonetheless, the savings I achieved from doing that were very dramatic, both in gallons and on my bill. So it was a fun real life anecdote about seeing that in action. Next slide, please. So thinking through the utility scale, this slide's a little busy, but you can see I looked at different utility sizes. So imagine you're a utility with 5,000 households, that's utility A, 25,000 households, 125,000 households, just to give you a sense of scale. And by 2050, I've assumed that all of your clothes washers meet the DOE standard, and there's 50% top loaders and 50% front loaders. You can see, like, if you're a big utility, that one with 125,000 households, you're at 300 million gallons a year of savings, so almost an MGD. And it's obviously scales based on your utility size. And I think this might be conservative because we could see more changes. I'm using max, not average, and I'm not really accounting for Energy Star.
Yeah, for the larger utility, that's about almost 1,000 acre feet per year of savings that could be achieved from clothes washers. It's real. It's real, and it could be substantial. The thing about these codes is that they impact every single clothes washer that is bought and sold.
Right.
And what do you think the useful life of a clothes washer is these days?
Around 14 years or so.
14. I thought it might actually be going down in some cases to 12, but it's safe to assume that over the next 20 years or so, almost every single machine that's in operation today will be replaced.
Exactly. And I think too, the one thing I didn't mention yet is every 6 years, at least every 6 years under current law, the Department of Energy is required to revisit these standards. So I think it's reasonable to assume during that, say, 25-year period, you might see 1 or 2 or 3 more standard revisions, I think are possible. Obviously, there's technological limits, but like I said, there are already more efficient models in the marketplace with Energy Star. So hard to predict that, but there's also a possibility we'll move some further.
This brings a new meaning to dry cleaning.
That's right. That's right. Although I think that there's been some discussion in the rulemaking about that issue, and the technology now like rotates your clothes through the water, so same amount of water, but your clothes get as wet and as clean. So, but it is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Next slide. And just thinking if you're on the line in your utility and you're wondering what this means, I did just want to flag some of the studies we've done. It's probably too much to read on the slide, but you can go to Alliance for Water Efficiency, Financing Sustainable Water, and you can read a number of studies. And what they show, this one's from Gilbert, Arizona, is that if you had not conserved, customer bills would actually be higher than they are now. And that's because you would have had to build, think if the clothes washer standards had never changed from the very beginning, whatever 1988 it was, we would be using so much more water now, and you would have had to build bigger pipes, bigger pumps, bigger plants, find new water sources, things like that. So I think if you see those, the good thing about codes and standards is they're gradual. So that should give you some time as a utility to plan. But if you're interested in thinking about these savings, I would encourage you to check out these resources and studies are very, very helpful in thinking that through. Next slide. I think that's it. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Should we dive into questions now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Well, cool. We've got a lot of great questions already coming in. And, I think the first one that often gets asked, and it's always valuable for us to address is, how do we ground truth the kind of work that Flume does in differentiating between indoor and outdoor use? Can Joe or Peter, one of you, just quickly touch on that?
Sure, I can talk about it. We were very lucky early on to have some partnerships with companies that make irrigation controllers, Wi-Fi irrigation controllers. For instance, now we have a partnership with Rainbird, where if a customer has both a Flume and a Rainbird, the Rainbird controller tells us every time it turns on and it tells us every time it goes off. And we've collected that type of data now for, I think, almost 3 years. So we have literally millions and millions of events that are basically telling us exactly, this is irrigation, this is irrigation, this is irrigation. And when you teach the computer to actually discern what's indoor and outdoor, you have to have a lot of ground truth, and this is absolute ground truth. So it teaches our models, what indoor use looks like versus what outdoor use looks like. So we feel really good about our indoor versus outdoor delineation because of all of that ground truth.
Awesome. And then another question that comes up often, but is always important to address, how are we collecting property information, perhaps year of construction, lot size, but also the number of people within a home?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. When somebody installs a Flume, we actually ask them quite a few questions. We ask them what appliances they have. We ask them how many people live in the house. We ask them if they have a pool or not. We ask them if they have do you have an irrigation controller? And if so, is it smart? Is it a Wi-Fi controller? So we know quite a bit about the types of appliances that are in the home. And most importantly, we know the number of people in the home. So we can start to do these gallons per person per day types of calculations. The other type of data we get from publicly available sources, so lot size, home value, all those types of things we get from public sources.
Thank you. Yeah, and a number of people ask that question actually as it relates in some ways to also some of the data related to the clothes washing standards, right? I think there's an assumption of, oh, how can we be sure this data is correct, especially if it's being used for policymaking? And is there potentially an inherent bias in this data? I'm curious, Andrew, if you can speak to, you were kind of inside the policymaking process as they set these standards. How do they account for this data coming in? Understanding no data is perfect, but also wanting to use this to obviously improve kind of processes and systems and policies.
Right. Yeah, I think it was interesting. Some of the comments AWE made, we made those through one of our committees. So if you're interested in being part of this, you can join one of our committees as a member. We commented on the data piece, what DOE was using. Interestingly, they rely heavily on a survey called REX, which is a survey-based way of asking consumers about, for example, frequency of loads. Our arguments actually were that data that we have as an industry in the water sector are actually better because here we're moving from survey results to measured data. And so I think we're trending in a good direction. Obviously, the data is not perfect, but to the extent we can influence and make the case to DOE that you should use actual measurements like this, that they are representative, I think that's really helpful to improving that process and improving their analyses. They didn't necessarily take everything we said this time, and that's fine. But as part of that process, I think we introduced them to some new data sets and some new ways of thinking about things.
That's great. And there's a question always of, is the data that Flume is getting from households inherently biased because of the nature of people who might be inclined to install a Flume, perhaps folks that are more kind of conservation focused? And we often say to that, no, because we work with a variety of different communities. We work with communities that are receiving these devices from their utility. They've been rebated through the utility. And so this is not something that they are seeking out naturally on their own. We've also done a number of studies where we compare Flume data to billing data from that community at large across the community to really assess how does Flume data hold up. And we find that by and large, indoor water use specifically really tracks outdoor water use, actually Flume tends to be a little higher because we often are installed on properties with a lot of outdoor irrigation as compared to perhaps the average across a community where you've got, let's say multifamily homes where there is no outdoor water use, et cetera. But, one of the things we're doing for these two studies, the California study on indoor use and the residential end uses of water study, is we'll also be collecting billing data from all of these communities to, again, ground truth the Flume data to make sure that we are fully representing kind of all households in a community. Go ahead.
I was
Peter.
going to say one thing related to clothes washers is that a flume does not impact how frequently someone uses a clothes washer or what the volume of their clothes washer is. And so I would contend that for fixtures like that, it's a very accurate way of looking at it. And honestly, there just aren't other ways of getting this data. That's what I mean. You got to go and survey someone and ask them, how frequently do you use your clothes washer? I mean, I could not tell you, exactly the number of loads. The same, not nearly the way that you can tell using this water data at this high frequency level. So, yeah, and it's not perfect. No data is perfect, but honestly, the data that we're working with to understand trends in water use is way, way, way better than almost any other sector at this point.
Great point. A couple of questions for you, Andrew. Someone asked for clothes washer rebates. Should we be looking at Energy Star labeled devices like we would WaterSense for other devices?
Yeah, so if you're interested in promoting more efficient products, Energy Star will be more efficient both now and in 2028 when the standard comes into effect. I think with a short useful life, some utilities choose to focus less on appliances and more on, toilets have a longer useful life or irrigation can have a bigger impact. But I think it's a good option to rebate them if it's important. Water saving is really important in your community, and I would focus on Energy Star.
Someone also asked, oh, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, Andrew, isn't there also is the Consortium for Energy Efficiency? There's a group that publishes these tiers of efficiency levels for clothes washers too.
Great.
Yeah, and then for communities that are looking for new ways to incentivize rebates, right? I think we've talked a lot in the past about whether or not toilets and shower heads are kind of played out in terms of rebate programs. But if a utility was looking to incentivize purchase of washing machines towards these more efficient machines, they're very expensive, and so obviously, utilities may not have a full budget to rebate a large portion of it. But how might utilities play a role in incentivizing kind of adoption of these?
Yeah, I think collaboration with energy utilities is often an interesting approach. Sometimes there's ways to combine incentives together, or they support your program or you support their program to kind of leverage dollars. I think that's a really good approach because there's hot water savings, there's electricity savings along with these devices where there might not be with the toilet. So I think that's a partnership might be a good approach in this case.
Is it really true the efficient models are more expensive? I thought that the prices had come down and sort of levelized more at this
So I
point.
don't have data handy on Energy Star versus non-Energy Star clothes washers. I could try to find that. If folks are interested, reach out to me. I'm happy to find that. I think I could. Front loaders are somewhat more expensive than top loaders, and front loaders are dramatically more efficient. So I think one way a utility could think about it would be think about the cost difference between a front loader and a top loader, and size or base an efficiency program around that is one option you could think through.
That's really interesting. And kind of as keeping along the thing of indoor use, I've got a couple of questions along that Andrew, you may have some thoughts on as well. One is just, does the size of the home seem to affect indoor DPCD?
No, I mean, this is one that's kind of amazing. The number of people is the most significant factor in determining indoor use. But we look at the square footage of the home for every single utility that we work with, and there is not a consistent trend that indoor water use is higher as the home size goes up. Outdoor water use actually does trend higher as the home size goes up a little bit, but indoor water use,
I think it's funny that like your water meter size, sometimes you go from 3/4 inch to an inch, or your septic tank size are all based on the number of fixtures in your home and like how many beds and bath, which doesn't seem to actually influence water use, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon.
And, someone asked, and this is more related to Flume specifically, but, how is leak detection impacting Flume's ability to understand indoor use? right? Is there potential to skew there? And are we able to measure those leaks by appliance and fixture to understand kind of its impact?
Well, I mean, I would say, I guess we're missing some of the leaks. I mean, to the extent that the Flume alerts them that there's a leak and they fix it, then we don't measure that leak anymore. And nothing else changes, but that does. So, I mean, that's really the significant difference, is that homes with Flumes are likely to have a lower level of leakage. And we think that amounts to between 4,000 and 8,000 gallons per year on average.
Yeah, that's really,
When we look at our data, about 2/3 of our customers are notified of a leak in the first month they have a Flume. And leak is kind of a misnomer, because most of the leaks we find are, one of the kids leaves a faucet kind of running a little bit in the bathroom, or you don't get the hose turned off completely outside. And it's, I would call it more erroneous water use, but those are the types of things that we're notifying people about, and they're fixing it, that otherwise might have run for weeks at a time before anybody even noticed, right?
Or the persistent flapper, I think, is the other thing, that where the toilet in the basement that nobody ever uses, and that it's just,
Or the toilet that everybody uses and everybody hears the hissing noise.
Precisely.
no, there's some great stories about flappers and leaks that I know I've heard from utilities across the nation, of just the cost even for the everyday household, that can add up to, truly. Another question that's interesting, we have had this in the past in summer months. We've had this question come up, and I want to ask it in relation to winter months, which is, does outdoor weather impact indoor use? Right, we've had this in very hot times where are people driven in more, so it's impacting, people are using more water indoors. Well, we've had a very wet and rainy season, at least in California this winter. Are we seeing any impact of that on indoor use? Or, and especially as relations to, we've talked in the past about drought messaging, people are more focused on conserving use. Does rainy weather actually cause people to care less? What are we seeing here?
We need to study this one more. This is something I'm hoping we'll look at through these studies. We see that there is change. Indoor use does move throughout the year. It's not always clear that it's climate driven. Some cases, sure, yeah, like we saw today, the curve for San Francisco, and sure, it looks like there was a increase maybe over the summer months, but that wasn't what we saw in Arizona, where it was more of a steady increase. But at the end of the day, we're only talking about a couple of gallons per person per day, so it wouldn't take a very much of a shift. So this is something that we'll definitely look at, and we'll have these longer billing data sets, which we can correlate with climate to take a closer look at this question.
Yeah, we've primarily studied kind of outdoor water in terms of how it changes seasonally, just because they're giant swings, right? It's hundreds of gallons per household per day swings. Whereas indoor water use, we're talking, 4 or 5 gallons per day type of swings. So again, that indoor water looks fairly flat throughout the year compared to outdoor use.
Yeah. One final thing, because we're a minute away from ending, Clover Rogers, who works for Harupa Valley Water District, and also sits on the AWE board, wrote, "My utility provides a robust rebate program for high efficiency clothes washers because we have a large DAC community, and they're considering raising it again." So Clover, not to throw you out here, but if you're interested in potentially contacting someone who's done this successfully, I'm sure Clover would be happy to speak with you all about this. And so we're really grateful for you all joining us. Lots of great comments in the Q&A section, specifically about what folks have done related to clothes washer standards and how this has been measured historically. So I'll be sure to share that. And also we'll be sharing, again, all the slides and the recording of this following this webcast. Thank you again. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with any follow-up questions as well. We always appreciate you joining us. And our next webcast will be in, what will it be, Joe? June, July? What month are we in? One of those months, but we'll be sure to
Stay tuned
to everyone about that. So thank you again. Really appreciate it. And Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you,
y'all.
everyone. Really appreciate your
Appreciate it.
time.